we're going to start this program. 2,000 years ago, a man who walked on the shores of the Sea of Galilee uttered these immortal words: I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. These are the words of Jesus Christ, the founder and the foundation of Madras Christian College. In His name, for His name, and through His name, we commence the 3-day international webinar. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you to the international webinar on environmental theatre and language teaching, organized by the oldest department of the 183 years old Madras Christian College. Dear all, we're extremely delighted to inform you that we have received close to 3,793 registrations. We have participants from many parts of India and countries such as Saudi Arabia, Nepal, Indonesia, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Algeria, Oman, United Arab Emirates, Pakistan, Bahrain, Iraq, Yemen, Sri Lanka, Philippines, and Ecuador. We are very thankful to all our dear participants who are right now with us in YouTube streaming. Right now we have the resource person and the faculty present and the past of the Department of English in the Zoom room, and the former alumni of the Department of English in the Zoom room. We're so grateful to all of you, retired professors and the present professors, the invitees of Dr. May and Dr. May. We're so happy that you're here with us this morning. We're very thankful to all of you. Let us get into today's program. Author and speaker Dr. Ravi Zacharias once said, I quote, "You can only learn so much from books. You can only learn so much from education. Ultimately, it is the wisdom of God that will carry you through in the toughest situations of life." To invoke the presence of God, may I request our senior professor of the Department of English, Dr. S. Franklin Daniel, to lead us in the opening prayer.
Shall we pray? God, our Heavenly Father, we thank you and praise you for this new day. We place this precious day in your hands. Thank you for your word, which says, morning by morning, new mercies we see, and great is thy faithfulness. Your word also says, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and He will establish your plans. We ask you to anoint the creativity, our ideas, our energy, so that even the smallest tasks may bring you honor. God, when we are challenged, guide us. When we are weary, energize us. May the work that we do, the way that we do it, bring hope, light, and courage to all. Bless our college with wisdom and discernment, our beloved students and faculty with commitment and compassion, patience and strength. Rooted in your love, may your face illuminate all activities done in your name. We pray for all the participants of this webinar from all over the world. Bless them. Thank you for the 3-day international webinar on environmental theatre and language teaching. Bless the resource personnel, especially Dr. May Joseph from Pratt in New York, as she delivers a keynote address today. I also pray for Dr. White and a good friend, Dr. Joseph Luther, the following days. Bless the organizers who have tirelessly worked for the success of this webinar, and our beloved principal, Dr. Wilson. Thank you for very truly Dr. Megula and all the faculty members. Bless also those dear faculty members who have just retired and who are part of this webinar. And we pray for beloved students of this great department. Thank you once again for making this happen. I commit everything of the technical aspect, everything may be taken care of by you. We want your blessings. In Jesus' almighty name, I humbly pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Meghala Rajan, the chair of the department, has always been the driving force and a pillar of support throughout the preparation of the webinar. May I request Madam to kindly welcome the dignitaries and participants.
Good morning and welcome to the webinar on environmental theatre and language teaching. What remained as mere fantasy has become a reality today. This is Professor Arun Kumar's brainchild, supported by divine intervention. Our dear principal, Dr. Paul Wilson, is here after witnessing 35 webinars that the college has organized so far. His efforts and motivation has made pandemic productive and COVID constructive with helpful intellectual exercises. Therefore, it is my proud privilege to welcome you, sir. Aberza Mr. Cyrus's goodwill and involvement in the activities of the college has enhanced our academic ventures. I extend a very warm welcome to you, sir. The resource persons for the webinar, Dr. May Joseph, Dr. Dwight Atkinson, and Dr. Joseph Jairaj, joyfully accepted our invitation. I welcome today's speaker, Dr. May Joseph. Her cheerful disposition and genuine connection with nature has the power to transform even the inanimate and infuse them with energy. Though she will be introduced soon, I have to share that as a student with lofty ideas, unique approaches, ever bubbling with energy and enthusiasm on stage and off stage, May Joseph was a phenomenal and admirable classmate of mine. My other classmates who are here today, Professor Anthony Jadas, who suggested the names of Dr. May and Dr. Jairaj and helped me invite them, Ms. Geeta, Dr. Joseph Christodas, Mr. Joe Prabhakar, Mrs. Prabha Arun, Mr. Murli Krishnan, Mr. Isaac, and others would vouch for this. I extend a hearty welcome to you, dear May. This is homecoming for you. I welcome all my professors who groomed us. We remember Dr. Rajani very specially and sadly on this day. I'm delighted to welcome all my classmates, my seniors, all heads and professors and students, former and current from MCC and from colleges within and across countries. I need to mention that I owe everything to God and to my 16 wonderful staff members of my department, beginning with Dr. Franklin Daniel, who are always there to pitch in whenever necessary. A special welcome to all of you. I wouldn't be here welcoming you without the webinar committee's hard work, headed by Professor Arun Kumar and supported by Professor Sam Golden, Mr. Allen, Mr. Jerome, and Mr. Theophilus Samuel. I wholeheartedly welcome all of you. It's therefore my pleasure to welcome all of you once again and wish all of you an enjoyable learning experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam. We are very delighted to have an eminent scholar, internationally acclaimed researcher, and able administrator, our Principal and Secretary, Dr. Paul Wilson, amongst us. I request sir to kindly deliver the presidential address. Sir, it's muted, sir.
Good morning, Dr. Meghla, the head of the Department of English, Dr. Franklin Daniel, and the organizing secretary, Professor Arun Kumar. I could also see some of the former professors here. Sir, I welcome you on behalf of Madras Christian College. International Webinar on Environmental Theatre and Language Teaching. Beautiful title for 3 days. It's not so easy to arrange an international webinar. I congratulate the whole department for having made such an effort. In organizing with the participants around 3,700 registrations, and I'm sure around 1/3 would turn up today. And I could also see from the participation from different countries. Looking at the way the educational scenario is transforming today, that we have made our international seminars truly international. I remember under the name of international, I have seen many conferences being held before the lockdown. But I see after the lockdown, thanks to the the advancement of technology, and the kind of network that we have already got by the grace of God, that we are able to invite speakers, eminent speakers from all over the world, and sometimes even participants from all over the world, and makes the international conference truly international in nature. So I'm very thankful to the department for having arranged such a wonderful conference on a beautiful topic on environmental theatre and language teaching. As Dr. Nekla mentioned, I've met Dr. Rajani once in the University of Madras, and I've heard a lot about him, and we miss him truly today. And I've seen a lot of writings on him in the newspapers and in the other magazines, and truly we miss such a wonderful genius in our department here. When I come to the title, I really want to welcome Dr. Mary Joseph, who's supposed to be the speaker for today, Professor, Department of Social Sciences and Cultural Studies, Pratt Institute, Newark, USA. Ma'am, we welcome you on behalf of the Madras Christian College. So it's a privilege, truly a privilege for me to welcome you. Looking at the components of the 3 days webinar, I could see that teaching become one among them. So that is very close to my heart. And especially the language teaching. And I wish to mention that post-lockdown would redefine and renegotiate the understanding and the philosophy of teaching. I'm sure that we are going to encounter that, and we need to prepare ourselves for the new terminology or the new philosophy that would emerge post-lockdown on teaching. And mostly the term teaching is being replaced by learning. And no more, I think we are trying to use this in journals when we publish, and people are only using learning in lieu of teaching. And I'm sure that the word learning befittingly substitutes the philosophy of teaching, where we are moving from the age-old instruction-based teaching to new design modules on constructivism. I think we are supposed to facilitate learning rather than bombarding students with contents. I think this is what is being understood now truly, because if not for the lockdown, we would not have learned the knowledge of constructing, the technology of constructing, or the nuances of constructing knowledge. Only because of COVID-19 and the consequent lockdown, now we are conditioned, I use a technical word called conditioning, getting conditioned to learn the nuances of teaching. And as a result, I see even 40 plus, the people in the faculty who have crossed 40 plus have been conditioned to learn what is Google Classroom, what is Google Meet, what is Zoom. I never knew what is Zoom prior to the lockdown, but I have to learn because it is a survival of the fittest. And I'm happy that the education is being molded, and more thought on teaching has emanated now. So I'm sure that the time that you're going to spend here, all these 3 days, would be really useful, and it will have some takeaways, some outcome to really cherish with, and it will definitely be integrated with our everyday teaching. And the other aspect of teaching that I would like to mention and record here is that we have always been thinking about teaching as that we know everything and students do not know anything. So we are trying to here only bombard students with knowledge, not knowing the prior knowledge that student has. I think that is very, very important when you try to think about teaching. The prior knowledge has to be facilitated. I think the understanding, the idea of constructivism facilitates this understanding of facilitating the prior knowledge of the students and then complementing with what he requires. Let us try to think about it. Teaching is not simply bombarding knowledge, or it is only to make them think. It is not about what to think, it is about how to think. And if we teachers make a conscious and meticulous effort in bringing this philosophy of facilitating the ability to think, or giving them a template or a scaffolding approach to think, I think students will bring out their own individuality in their lives. And mostly I see that the ability to think and problem solving skills are lacking among the students, because Madras Christian College has been known for that. I've seen many students, my own son used to say, whenever I talk about social sciences and sciences, my son used to say that you see a lot of IAs are only from social sciences and humanities, not from sciences. And I really take his word, and I'm sure that we try to use social sciences and humanities as a tool to sharpen our minds. I think this is the way we need to think. Many of my students, when they take up chemistry, And finally, they fumble and say, sir, I have chosen this particular subject in a very wrong way. I really regret for that. I used to tell them, don't ever perceive this way. The way you have to perceive of choosing chemistry as your career for 3 years is only to take this subject as a tool and to transform your thinking. Maybe using all process skills that are associated with chemistry, like observation, inference, and experimentation, and classification, evaluation, assessment, and all those process skills definitely would have completely refined your thinking process now. Now you're free to take up MA English if you want. You are free to take up MSW if you want. If you're free to take up MCA, because we have already given you allied mathematics. So this is how we need to perceive learning process. Let me not use a word teaching. Hereafter, let me use a word called learning. So this lockdown has really conditioned us, and I'm sure around 3,700 registrations definitely would be ending up with 1/3 or whatever fraction that you may calculate. And I'm sure that this is very encouraging results that we come across from the conducting of international webinar. So the last aspect that I would like to place before you is that we are all good teachers and we had been good researchers in the earlier dispensations. But over the period, I see there is a kind of declining in the inclination towards research and publications in the journals of international repute. I'm not saying this on my own. We have quantified it based on the results that we have in IQAC, and we found out that we do not see a balance between science, humanities, and social sciences. And it's a high time that we need to think of keeping in mind the new education policy that always contributes to the transdisciplinary research. No more, I would like to record here that maybe in a decade or so, or 2 decades, we may not have a separate English department or a chemistry department or physics department. We are entering into a new dispensation as per the new education policy and as per the order of the day, the whole world. So we need to be preparing ourselves for interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and transdisciplinary as an end. So I'm encouraging the Department of English to come up with beautiful papers of high international repute and to publish them. And that would really spill over in your research, not only on research, it will spill over in your teaching, maybe a learning process. So I wish all the best for the successful conduct of this particular international webinar for 3 days. So thank you very much for inviting me. Good luck.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I request Professor C. Monsing Daniel of the Department of English MCC to kindly introduce the speaker.
Greetings to one and all present here. Today, I have the honor of introducing to you Dr. May Joseph, Professor of Global Studies in the Department of Social Science and Cultural Studies at Pratt Institute in New York. We, as a department, are overjoyed to welcome an alumna of our college. She completed her graduation and post-graduation in our Department of English, Madras Christian College. She received her doctorate from the University of California at Santa Barbara. She is well known for being the founder and artistic director of the Harmattan Theatre, an environmental theatre company based in New York, which focuses on global water issues. She is trained in Indian and Tanzanian environmental and folk theatre traditions, Japanese Kyojin, and several experimental theatre techniques. She has conducted theatre performances addressing water issues along river and ocean cities in New York, Lisbon, Cape Town, Delhi, Cochin, Amsterdam, Venice, and Istanbul. Her interest lies at the junctures between cities, performance, water ecologies, and coastal futures. She has authored several books, writing widely on transnational cultural flows, water ecology, global environmentalism, and virtual urbanism. Her books include The Ghosts of Lumumba, Sea Log, Indian Ocean to New York, Fluid New York, Cosmopolitan Urbanism and the Green Imagination, Nomadic Identities, The Performance of Citizenship, and she is the co-author of the book Performing Hybridity. She is a serious academician and she has been the recipient of several prestigious fellowships and awards, including the Cornell Society for the Humanities Fellowship, Mellon Grant, Ford Foundation Grant, Rockefeller Fellowship, postdoctoral fellowships at Brown University and the University of Illinois, and a Humanities Research Institute fellowship from the University of California. She is an artist, academic, activist, or very simply an all-rounder. We feel privileged and honored to have her with us on this special day. We look forward to be enriched by her knowledge and experience. Thank you. Over to you, Arun.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Mohan Singh, for introducing the speaker. We are truly honored by the presence of Professor May Joseph. Without further ado, I joyfully hand over the session to Professor Joseph. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you so much, Arun. I just want to check, do I have 40 minutes from now?
Yes, ma'am, you're right.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm just putting myself on a timer so that I can, I'm on the timer for 40 minutes. So thank you, Arun, and thank you for all the wonderful introductions and for the welcome. And I want to just start out by saying, this is a great honor. Thank you, all of you, for inviting me and for giving me this incredible opportunity to come back to MCC after 35 years. And I want to thank Mekhala Rajan, who invited me 2 months ago. And when I accepted it, I had thought I would get a chance to see Rajani one more time. I saw him last in 1985. And that was not to be, but I want to dedicate this talk to Professor Rajani, to Professor Joseph James, whose birthday, or rather, sorry, his passing was today. It's his anniversary. And so I want to particularly note Dr. Joseph James' influence on my theater work, and Dr. G.K. Matthews as well. These were 3 great theater luminaries of MCC in the 1980s who really shaped my ideas of what theater can become. They trained me to think and to understand that one should always make beautiful things. I also want to give a shout out to Professor Nirmal Selvamani and my colleague, but also my teacher, Professor V. Geeta. Nirmal and Geeta did this extraordinary performance in 1985. It was called Shadows. It was a street theater performance in the heart of the city of Madras at a juncture of a crossroads. And it was an extraordinary experience for me because, you know, it was very volatile, it was rambunctious, it was provocative, there were police there, there was a lot of chaos, people ended up running away, all of us actors had to run away, I was at the audience, but I was very moved from this performance, and I must say this event that I experienced that Geeta calls visual journalism stayed with me all these years, and it opened up what the possibility of a theater that is outdoors could look like. So I also want to frame my talk by saying that, you know, I spent 5 years in Tambaram, and it took me years to make sense of my life in Tambaram, but I realized that what I was living in Tambaram was what we call today forest swimming. It's this deep ecology, this immersion in the forest and what the forest can teach us. And at the time we did not have a language for it, but now I understand that. But the roots of my interest in multi-species ecologies and a pedagogy of that which is more than human, attentive to the stones, the rain, the wind, the ocean, the forests, the sand, the desert, that this came out of being immersed in the forest of MCC for 5 years, in the silent nights and the extraordinary the arcade of trees and the forest. So I want to emphasize the incredible biosphere of Tambaram and what a teaching experience it is as an ecological space that shaped my own thinking. So I want to thank all of you for giving me this opportunity. And I'm going to put this now on a share screen, if that's okay. So I will proceed with my talk now. Can you all hear me and see me? Could somebody give me a yes, a heads up?
Go ahead, May, we can see you and hear you. Yeah.
Yes, very
Great.
clear.
I'm just trying to control something that's I'm so sorry. I have to get off for a minute because something isn't right on my end. Sorry, I need to get off. It's a clunky technology. Right, I'm going back, right, up on again. So yes, so the work I do is a pedagogy of climate change. And I want to start off with this image here of where I live, because climate is a global experience, but the approach that is ecological is very context specific. I live in New York City, and I live on an island called Manhattan, which is the background you see that there. And I've taken this picture from a tiny island called Governor's Island, which is being used as a seawall between the Atlantic and Manhattan to protect Manhattan from storm surges. So my interest in performance since I left MCC is to struggle with the project of making theater an ecological practice. And I have seen ways to adapt my interest in theater towards a practice that would train students to think in ways that they hadn't within the proscenium itself. So I teach a class called Walking New York, and it's a class that is grounded in the many minor islands of New York. New York is an archipelago of over 40 islands. Most people only know Brooklyn and Manhattan. And in my class, we walk through these peripheral islands, studying the coastline, the seawalls, the wetlands, the swamps. And the idea is that through these different weeks studying the coast, that a pedagogy of living by the sea can emerge. And one of the things I learned in Tambaram is the challenge through environmental practices to the question of how do you make people care for the planet? And for me, in my course, every week, I want to awaken my students to the fragility of living in a coastal environment. So the challenges of an ecological theater to me is a daily and quotidian challenge. It's a challenge of the everyday. And I bring students to places that no one goes to. For instance, this abandoned site on Brooklyn side, because it used to be a pier and now it's all ruins. And the other side is Manhattan. And I bring my students who are future architects and urban planners and designers, and ask them to think about the historical past, to begin to understand how they can design for an ecological future. And I come back to my training or my immersion in the forest swimming of Madras's forests, because I think it was listening to these trees that made me alert to the extraordinary landscape that New York City is, which is these 40 islands. But most New Yorkers, they never get to the coast. And they have no idea there are islands outside Manhattan and Brooklyn. And this has to do with American modernity, which is shaped by the car. And a predisposition to not walk more than a block or two away from where you live. So this landscape, which is the landscape of a barrier island called Far Rockaway, it's the farthest island from Manhattan, but if you're coming from Europe, it would be the first island you see that is part of the New York archipelago. It's called Far Rockaway. And the image you see here is entirely artificial. This part of New York was completely washed away in the storm of 2012, the Hurricane Sandy, and everything you've seen here is artificial. The sand was artificial, it was brought from somewhere else. The grass was planted here as low-tech climate resilience technique to plant these grasses that will arrest the flow of water. So you have all over New York the emerging of new landscapes as storm surge barriers that are low-tech. So the challenge for me in my teaching is to offer students a way of thinking about the phenomenology of the Anthropocene. By the Anthropocene, I mean the historical period that Paul Crutzen has defined as the Anthropocene, the period between 1500 and 21st century, which is the period of accelerated colonization. And it's a period that dramatically shifted the planet into more aggressive and anthropogenic ways of dealing with the earth and the ocean. This image is a powerful one. It's the first existing image of New York. It's at the time by the Dutch was New Amsterdam. It's the first visual depiction. As you can see, it's land framed by water. And the Dutch always painted these terra nullius, this sort of virgin land that was going to be colonized. And here you see that the most distinctive aspect of this terrain is the scaffold, which would have been today's Wall Street. And you see the windmill, and you see the tavern, which is the tallest building there. And this particular genre of Johannes van Boons's paintings is very interesting because it was painted over and over again to depict various towns across Asia. Now, the interesting thing about the Dutch is they kept very good records, and because of that, it's easy to study a very young city like Manhattan, which is only 400 years old. And Eric Sanderson, the landscape ecologist who works in New York, and he took on a project about 10 years ago to reproduce the landscape of the Lenape peoples through sort of biomorphism and sort of biotic modeling. And so what he did was to reconstruct what New York looked like. It's 1609 on the top of this image, and this image, this kind of contrasting ecologies of the landscape in 1609 before the arrival of the Dutch and the landscape we have today is this kind of contrasting dialogical relationship that I try to bring to my students' attentions. When you study landscape, when you study cities, when you think about your own somatic regimes, you have to think what was here 200 years ago, what was here 400 years ago, what was here 1,000 years ago, and build out of that an understanding of what sort of buildings you will design, what sort of plumbing you're going to think about based on whether it was wetlands, whether it was a cove, whether it was a buried river. And so this kind of palimpsestic approach is very fundamental to how I come to the understanding of theater. When I pick a theater site, I always ask what happened here 1,000 years ago, what happened here 2,000 years ago, and I build it up from there to an understanding of what happened to the site in this century. This case, this is Times Square on the right, and Times Square before the colonization, which would have been a maple forest, which again is very fascinating when you think about the different ecologies that were buried over with concrete with the coming of industrialization of the Anthropocene. So much of my work is about water ecologies and who has rights to the city. New York is completely covered in concrete, but there is this incredible map called the Veely map in 1865. It was made by the sanitation engineer for Central Park as the city was being buried in concrete. So you have this extraordinary map that maps every single water source of Manhattan at a time where you could not see rivers anymore, water anymore, it's all concrete. And this map has been a key map for my theater work. I have been working with performers, actors, and students to trace all the water sources that are buried around New York to make them aware that there are animate and vibrant and alive ecologies buried under the cement, and that a lot of the flooding, a lot of the low-lying regions, a lot of the wetlands and the swamps are happening in New York because of the buried water sources. And if those sources could breathe again, there would be less water inundation in many parts of New York. So a lot of my work deals with the original it's not a nostalgic project. It's a project of understanding ecology across time zones, across durational frameworks of history, and also so you have here 1609 Lenape geology and the contemporary waterline of landfill. And students need to understand where that landfill ends. And it's fascinating when the storm of 2012 happened, the water, the flooding went all the way to this original water line of the Lenape topography you see here. That's as deep as where the water went. And I always tell my students, if we knew that ecology better, we would be able to address how to build better resiliency projects. So much of my work has to deal with the trans-oceanic praxis, because I'm from Africa, lived in India, and then came to the US. And I want to share with you now for 5 slides, the philosophy and the cartography that has shaped my theater work. There is a statue in the middle of Union Square in Manhattan, which is Gandhi walking. And it is an incredibly powerful image, because as we know, Gandhi walked to get away from the British. Gandhi walked on the coast, violating salt laws. So the act of walking that Gandhi represents is an incredibly powerful idea, and one in which in New York we entirely have forgotten. And my own project was, how do I connect Gandhi back to India? And the maps of the Dutch East India Company, this is the acronym VOC, which is in Dutch, the Dutch East India Company, was my link. I had not realized that the large entrepôts of Asia, of which there were 600, included New Amsterdam, which became New York. So my project for the last 15 years has been connecting the historiography and the geology of New York to the wider ramifications of some of Dutch East India Company's more prized possessions in the 16th, 17th century that today are all the major Asian cities. I share with you 3 maps here that sort of shape the ontological reasons for my work. This map was taken at the tip of Cape of Good Hope. It's a Portuguese map, and it's a very powerful map because it demarcates 2 journeys. The Bartolomé Dias journey, the first journey with the attempt to cross over into India, and it ends at the Cape of Good Hope. He could not go any further. And the red line, which is Da Gama's journey, which went from Portugal, and he finally made it to Calicut. And it changed the history of Kerala in ways that are far-reaching. And so I mapped all the entrepôts of the Dutch East India Company from New Amsterdam all the way to Asia. And this map has been my guiding map for a lot of my theater work, to understand the implications of Portuguese and Dutch colonizations across the Indian Ocean and the South China Seas. And it's a fascinating map because I thought I was doing work in the 17th century till the 2004 tsunami, where this extraordinary monster storm, which was not climate related because it was an earthquake, but the ravages of the consequences of environmental degradation was far-reaching and really expanded into the very maps of the Dutch East India Company, which were all the former small entrepôts that have now become some of the largest cities in the world in Asia. And so it is this map of Monsoon Asia that used to be the map of the Dutch East India Company, and that today is the map of some of the largest cities in the world, the most crowded cities, all of them low-lying, many of them in former archipelagos, because the Dutch, they always look for strategic places to set up their first ports in any of these new landscapes. They were always islands for security reasons, and frequently they were archipelagos. So they're all landfills now. So if you go to any of these places, you think like in Madras. So if you go to Cochin, you go to Malé, you go to Gaul, you think these are like smooth landscapes. They're all landfills. And so making students understand that has been part of my project. So I did the first performance of mine at Governor's Island in 2009. And this performance, I picked the historic part of the pre-colonial place of Governor's Island, which was the first island the Dutch arrived in 1624 when they came into to what is today known as the New York Harbor. And they settled there in 1624 before they made an onslaught onto the island of Mannahatta to kill all the Indians there before they could move there. So we did a performance on the pre-colonial Lenape side to mark that transition. And for me, it was a connection between South India and New York, a historical connection that Americans don't know. But for me, New York is very Indian Ocean, and I've written much about this connection of New York being an Indian Ocean site. So my work in the last sort of 5-7 years has been very preoccupied with the Malabar Coast, where my parents come from, but they moved to Africa in the 1950s. I was born and grew up in Africa. But my fascination with the Malabar Coast from Cochin to Kollam is because obviously because my parents have lived there for a long time now, but also because all the Dutch archives that I was studying for my book on New York was archives that was opening up Cochin and Alleppey and Kollam and Kanyakumari in ways that I had not realized were connected to my interest in archipelagos in New York. So I realized that this is an integrated system of low-lying regions around the world, and that New York has more in conversation with Cochin and with Batavia and with Mali than New York has with Chicago or with Las Vegas. So because it is a coastal city and therefore, and a low-lying city, and therefore has a lot more in common with coastal cities around the world and island cities around the world like Hong Kong. So the work I've been doing is producing performances in many former Dutch and Portuguese port cities, but addressing the decolonial aspects, the fact that, you know, these landscapes may be post-independence, but we're still dealing with the ravages of the Anthropocene and the impact of human occupation and violence and colonial architecture, particularly in the Malabar. If you go, there are forts all over, and Fort George, St. George and Madras. I mean, there are forts across the East Coast as well. And this is the taking of Cochin of the Dutch from the Portuguese. This is Fort Cochin, where my family lives. And much of the coastline in Kerala, from Cochin to Kollam, is straddled with the traces and the scars of colonization, as well as the struggle to create new forms of resilience, whether it's seawalls or resilient plants. But this is a ferocious coast. It's a coast where you cannot hide when there's a storm, and in that sense, you know, a lot of environmental theorists in the United States say, you know, they talk very interestingly about living in Asia and feeling much more intimate with the multi-species ethnography because there's less places to hide, as opposed to the very militarized geologies of American landscapes. And this is true of Kerala, where this is the town of Varkala. Much written about in the navigational notes of many Dutch travelers in the 17th century. But today, an incredibly fragile ecology with the rough seas and the rising seas and the interface between land and sea. And so one of the challenges I bring to my work is to ask the question, how do we ask an ocean-centered question in the kind of theatrical performative work we can do? For this site, for instance, Kayankulam, which is again an extraordinary site because it was one of the oldest ports in the world. This is where people came from Rome in the 1st century AD and before, because that's how the trade winds were. And this port is no longer used, but this is what they call the Barrier port, the old port. And you know, it's fascinating because it's mentioned in many of the early archives, you know, the pre-medieval archives of Italian and Dutch travelers, Portuguese travelers. So this particular image is an image of the Nindagara Bridge next to where my mother lives in Kollam. And this is a fascinating place to me because it's the largest opening to the Arabian Sea. It's unprotected. It is frequently overwhelmed by storms. You know, a lot of catastrophe from monster waves. It is also the place that Marco Polo wrote a lot about when he was traveling to Kollam, where he stopped, and he mentions this great bay and this great entrance to the sea. And this is the the place that he much talked about, and so does Da Gama, and so does a bunch of other, Dutch navigators like Jan Nuyhoff, who lived, he was the Governor General in Kollam for a couple of years, and he writes about his notes about the incredible water entry and the waterways between Quilon and Cochin, this intercoastal highway that was perfect for Dutch commerce. So thinking through the geology of Kerala has been one way for me to think about the questions I want to ask through an ecological performance. And for me, because my family still lives inside the entrails of Dutch and Portuguese colonization. This is the Thangaserri Portuguese fort in Thangaserri, where a lot of my cousins still live, and I lived as a child. And this is the actual fort's, buttress through which I'm taking a photograph. It is a place that I, as a child lived, but my mother still lives there in Quilon near the fort. And, in my family, there's a rumor that there was a great-great-great-grandmother who was Indonesian. And this is the other side of living on the coast, on either the eastern side of India or the western side. We have these perfect stories of family lineages, but no one talks about the realities of migration and trade and contact and colonization. And the rumor that, there was an Indonesian great-grandmother, which, was hush-hush, but my granduncle, who was a priest, told me the story. And, there's no way for me to prove it. But in my archive research in The Hague on the VOC archives in the Dutch East India Company, I came across the log of 2 ships from Batavia bringing on board on a Dutch ship two loads of comfort women that was stopped in Kollam, where they refueled to head off to Cape Town. So this was a very chilling archive for me to run across, and it is one that stayed in my mind because this is the site. And whether the rumors are true or not, the historical legacies of contact and encounter and the resulting consequences of colonization, live in the ways people imagine themselves today. This is the Thangaserri Fort, and now you see the seawall here. And for me, this particular landscape is fascinating because it raises the challenges of connecting the historical past with the ecological futures we are facing as the global south, where unfortunately we will be unfairly much more affected by the melting ice of the Arctic and the Antarctic ice because of the way the water flows from the warm to the cold. And apparently the global south will be far more inundated in ways that the global north will not be. And I am fascinated by this topography. This is Edava Pozi. Again, this is a very kind of a porous landscape. This one is valley cover. Again, these kind of openings to the sea between islands and barrier islands. Much of Kerala are barrier islands. They're all archipelagic. And this kind of sliver of barrier islands that strings across the Malabar Coast is intriguing. This is Paravur, which is an ancient port. And I actually love this image of this guy hanging out there, and I thought, what a good idea. He's got an umbrella, and it turned out he had a beer bottle. He was all set. And I thought, good taste. But the point being, what an extraordinary place geologically where there is this incredible oceanic and a multi-species engagement with human possibility. And it is one in Kerala where the fishermen and the people who live by the coast truly understand. This is Malabar, and it is a place that I love very much. It's an incredibly vulnerable, incredibly volatile place where the ocean is very strong, powerful, and raw. And at any storm, much of this area gets washed away and people come back. So it is this kind of threat of subsidence and inundation and flooding that connects these low-lying areas. This is Virinjam. where, again, an extraordinary place that reminds me of Varanasi, because it has churches and temples and mosques, and is built up on a hill, and it's very dramatic. But it's also a major port, and now it's turning into the largest Indian port in competition with the commerce in Colombo. So, but in terms of its ecology, it's actually an extremely fragile area where fishing folks have lost their work, but also the geology of the area is so open to the sea that Virinjam has suffered many monster storms, and people have died and lost their livelihoods, and their homes have been washed away. So there's this drama combined with this sort of hidden history of colonization, where Virinjam is actually mentioned in a lot of the archives. So, so this is the kind of interfacing between historical archives and contemporary ecological concern that has shaped my interest in the theater. The performance I did in Cochin in 2012, When the Sea Rises, addressed this juxtaposition of ecological concern, because the 2004 tsunami, there was a big wave that came into the Marine Drive and affected Marine Drive. It also washed away 100 people's houses in Alapi, where my father's from. So this story always stayed in my mind, and I wanted to do this performance, and I finally managed to do it. And I worked with Kalari Python, Thayam trans performers, and I put them at the site of the Dutch Portuguese fort. They were very uncomfortable living, performing outside the theatrical spaces they were used to, but they were also incredibly excited with this embrace of the elements. So for me, this realization of bringing the trans performer, bringing the power of Thayam into a conversation with the sea, with the refineries behind, with the toxic acidifying coastline that you can see there with the algae in the water. This was the theater that would, reflect what we are struggling with, that there is no easy way to address how we can come up with an environmental ecological practice. We can only find ways to ask questions, and we can only struggle with the imaginative and passionate engagement with stone and with trees and with landscape. So that's what we worked on in this performance, which was truly transformative. It was 2.5 hours long. I oppose the kind of Vitruvian idea that it's like a painting. You go to the theater and you see the whole performance with your eyes by sitting inside the proscenium. I'm much more influenced by Geeta and Nirmal's visual journalism, or Joseph James's Hunting the Sun direction, which he put in MacPhail, in the MacPhail Center, in that hall with the pillars, and it was 360 degrees, and I'd sort of taken that aesthetic and put these people out in the ocean to ask the question, how can humans engage with the ocean? How do we listen to the ocean? So my work has been very involved with thinking about the Lakshadweep Sea area. Why? Because of the history of the global north. We are generating over 60 or 70% of the world's global greenhouse gases, but India now and China has joined it. But much of the catastrophe and effects of global climate change will be in the global south, particularly in the region from the Maldives all the way to the South China Seas. And I wanted to, this is the area that focuses on my work, which is the Lakshadweep, Maldives, Sri Lanka, the Malabar and Coromandel Coast. And here it's a reach out to anyone who's interested in the Coromandel Coast as a coastal site to work with me, because I don't know any scholars there. I know there's a lot of very good work. I just don't have any personal contacts. But for me, this region is a region where the crisis of climate will be felt first. And it's a region, when you look, my mother lives there alone now in COVID. She lives by the sea. And, it's a very tactile experience. But I like the 17th century French map, because this map communicates the urgency of what I'm talking about. If you take away the mainland of India and you sort of look at the Bay of Bengal area, this is a 17th century map, and it really captures how fragmented the original landmass from the Maldives to the Lakshadweep, the Ceylon, to the Sri Lankan geology, to the Arakan Islands of the Myanmar area where the Rakhine peoples live and have been coerced out of, to the Sundarbans, to the to the Andaman Nicobar Islands, you see this incredible geology of archipelagos. They are in a singular conversation, but are divided by nation-state conversations. And so Maldives doesn't share any information with Sri Lanka or with the Kerala coast. Whereas that should be the kind of conversation we are all having. You know, how do we share knowledges? How do we share infrastructure? So this is a map I got at The Hague. The Trincomalee, so for the Dutch, their prized possessions were Trincomalee, Cochin, and Recife in Brazil. And they have these three places hanging in paintings at the Rijksmuseum. And it really shocked me. It's in the last room of the Rijksmuseum. And it always surprised me that these are places they consider some of their prized entrepots. So very interesting. And these maps, this is an early map as well. And this is a map of Sri Lanka. But I am fascinated by the region I've marked in red, because that is entirely archipelagic. And it has much more in common with the Gulf of Manaar and the eastern coast of Tamil Nadu and Kerala and the Maldives and the Lakshadweeps than either countries understand, because it's a singular geology. And today, this region of the Kalpithia area of the lagoon is incredible. It's called Puttalam, this whole area that is so fragile. It looks very coherent, but it's actually all barrier islands. Look at this shot I took from the plane. I mean, you know, these people are washed out at every storm, and the big storms are coming. Now, in 2017, the International Panel on Climate Change, pointed out that over 28% of the world's population lives on and one of the criteria for me to do a performance with them is that I could not show their face and I could not use their names. So I did a video with them actually, and it was really beautiful. So they are looking at the town of Malé, and it's a very poignant performance, because I had asked them, you know, what do you think about the impending rising seas, and and their answers were so humbling that there was no plan. So this is my larger project, the return journey from South Asia, from Cochin to Lisbon, and as a purging of colonization. So I did a project at the Cape of Good Hope, which was originally called the Cape of Torment, because it was very rough to get there, and that's what Bartolomé Diaz called the place, the Cape of Torment. And King Manuel thought it was very bad marketing, and he said he had to change the name to Cape of Good Hope. So I did a project there, with these are all Dutch maps of the Cape. And I did a project with friends of mine who were the Cape Malay community. And at the time, I didn't know that they were part of the original Imam's family. So they had never been to the coast, because under apartheid, you could not go to the coast. It was forbidden for coloreds and native peoples to go to the coast. So when I brought them to the coast, they were both scared and elated, because Madame Kimi, the woman who sits on the right, she's a great granddaughter of the first Imam who was brought as a prisoner and a slave from Batavia. And you could not carry Qurans on the ships. He memorized the whole Quran. So he was one of the first Imams in the town. So you have this extraordinary history of colonization and slavery that comes with the baggage of thinking about coasts. And I finally got to do this project in Lisbon, at the site where Da Gama would have returned from Cochin. He would have landed between these two pillars on his ship, unloading slaves, spices, elephants, gifts for the King Manuel. And I had to do a project there as a way of coming to terms with, coming from the Kerala coast, of seeing Lisbon and the sites where these very extractive imperial aggressors came from. So I'm running out of time, so I want to show you a couple more images, and my computer is not working very well, but and I want to finally end with performances I did in New York, one in 2013, which is at the site of the Lenape people's homes, and which is the barrier island of the Far Rockaway that I mentioned. And today it is an area that's been completely destroyed by storm surges. And so I had to do a performance the year after 2012 as a way of returning to the site of recovery of after storm surge in New York. And then finally, the performance in 2017 on Governor's Island, which was destroyed by 2012's Hurricane Sandy and was reconstituted. Hello, could you turn off I'm sorry, can someone turn off the microphone? Thank you. So this is the final performance with Manhattan in the back. There was a violent storm heading, but this was the performance I did to commemorate the storm Irene, and many other storms that have pummeled the Caribbean and New York. This is my daughter Celine, who has always been my crew member, and she graduated to being a performer finally. But this performance had 100 performers in it. And my performances are always free. I believe in free theater. No one else in America believes in free theater. It never gets funded. And I invited people to come and join, and the response was extraordinary, because people understand that the fragility of living by the coast is very, very precarious, and that our fate is incredibly dependent on how we manage living by the sea. The sea is a shared future, and we need to begin to ask the question of what the sea, how the sea sees human occupation. And I think it is this sort of object-oriented methodology that I'm finding very useful, extremely inspiring, and really helping me to sort of go forward in the question of an ecological practice. I'm trying to, sorry, I wanted to just come to the last slide, which is me trying to train 100 people in 2 hours, because a lot of these performances, people rehearse online for about 2 weeks, because they live all over the Northeast region of New York. And then they show up 2 hours early, and I train them, and the performance itself is always durational. It takes about 2 hours. And the idea is that no one can see a performance in its entirety, because like the Avalokiteshvara Padmapani, the sleeping Buddhas of Thailand, and the temples of Borobudur and Angkor Wat, where the frescoes wrap around the temple. So you don't see the whole story with your eye. You have to walk across and see the temple, the entire stories. And these stories are layered, 7 layers of a story, multiple stories simultaneously wrapping around the temple. And this is the notion of narrative that I work with in my performances, where multiple actors are in different directions. So you can't really see the entire thing from one perspective. And to me, that is much more representative of a multi-species approach to thinking about movement. And a principal aspect of my performance is a walking methodology. It is the methodology of using walking techniques from Gandhian notions of walking to Thich Nhat Hanh's notion of meditation walking, to the forest monks of Laos's idea of walking theater practitioner. So this is my thinking on ecological theater, that ecological theater is a daily practice, and it is a practice of small gestures. it isn't the big performance that you pay $200 to see for 2 hours. It's the small gestures of small acts that are transformative. For instance, when I go for a class and I come to an incredible place where something terrible happened, after class, I'll keep a couple of students and I'll ask them to do a performance. And let me tell you, at most of my performances, I have no audiences because they're too remote, and I don't wait for fair weather. I work in storms and in ice and in heat, and these places are so hard to get to. Nobody can come there because it takes too much time. But if you want to do an environmental theater, you cannot ask the question, who will be my audience? Because I can't promise you the audience. Like in Cochin, the audience at 6 a.m. in the morning when that performance unfolded were mostly drunks, early, guys who are like doing exercise, a couple of people doing yoga, most of them are fishermen, and that was the audience. You do the performance for the sea and for yourself. So my work is very, in that sense, hermetic. But all the work I do, the one I did in Cape of Good Hope, was at 6 a.m. in the morning to escape all the rangers, the forest rangers who would have prevented us from making a performance at the most important tourist site of South Africa, which is Cape of Good Hope. So I will stop there, run out of time. But I want to talk about the idea of what is an ecological imagination. It has to be multi-species. It has to be cognizant about the ocean and the trees and the stones and the rain, which Indian philosophy is filled with. But we really haven't accessed that language adequately to harness it for designing for the future. So I thank you all for giving me this opportunity to talk about South Asia and South India with people who know where that is. Because mostly I talk to people who don't even know where India is. And so it's a great honor, and thank you so much. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you.
It was phenomenal. I'm just reading Professor Mangai's comment on the Zoom chat box that clearly reflects all our response. This is truly awe-inspiring. It feels like Earth speak. Thanks for making us listen to the Earth, subterranean, and deep consciousness. Thank you once again, Professor, for this great lecture. Now I request Professor Christina Dhanasekaran of the Department of English, MCC, to coordinate the Q&A session. Professor Christina. Professor Christina.
Okay. Hello, Christina. Are you there? I can't hear you.
Professor Christina, we are not able to hear you, ma'am.
Good morning to all.
Dr. May Joseph, are you able to hear Professor Christina's voice?
Not at all. Nothing at all. Do you hear her?
No.
No, I don't hear anything. Maybe she can ask the question on the chat. I don't know if she can hear me or not.
Professor Christina will be joining us quickly. So meanwhile, I'm just requesting those who are right now in the Zoom chat box, you can post your questions in the Zoom chat box. And those who are on YouTube, kindly post your questions in YouTube chat box. We will be very happy to take 3 questions from you.
Make sure there are easy questions.
You should have kept that in mind when you were a student, May Joseph.
That's good repartee. I don't know who said that, but good. Oh, Mangai has a question. It says, can you elaborate a bit about performing for oneself? How does it alter the performance studies as a discipline? I love the question of performing for oneself. My work is not about performing for oneself by any means. This is not a narcissistic project. It is a project about communing and immersing inside landscapes. Now, these landscapes don't have to be in nature, because as Aldo Leopold, the conservationist, says, you don't go out to the woods to look for environmental existence. You work with garbage in the city. You work with the sewage. You work with toxic waste. You work with ruins of the city. So you don't go looking for the woods, So what is the performing for myself? Well, it's more about not worrying about marketing the performance. It's about picking the site. And what does that site mean? If it's a toxic waste site, no one's going to come there. But if you, like, I want to do performance in Dhanushkodi, in Rameshwaram. And it's very hard to get there, and one day I will make a performance there. But I don't know who's going to come and watch it. It'll be probably people who live there who are very fragile in these kind of, economies. So in response to you, Mangai, the work I do, people come because they want to learn, when they come and they do the performance, they find themselves transformed by the experience of engaging with the coast, engaging with the sites. It's not always the coast. Sometimes it's streets in New York. So when you ask me that question, it's more about it is about a deep communion with yourself and the built environment, whatever it is. So it's as opposed to the New York theater or the American theater idea that theater is entertainment. I bring more the concept of theater's bhakti. It's a combination between the bhakti and the bhakik, the Greek bhakik tradition of ecstasy and the bhakti tradition of immersion and ritual. So that, I hope I've sort of just done it in a trivial way. Does it alter performance studies? Performance studies has no interest in the real experiments that decolonial thinking brings. I think it's outmoded. I think, they keep the status quo. I have no interest in that project. I'm much more interested in the very experimental and inventive projects that young people are doing across different fields: architecture, design, urban planning, oceanographers, you see. And so it's out of that experience, foresters, arborists, that this kind of conversation is emerging. How do you combine in your performance a sense of letting be with the need to know? That's a beautiful question. And I think it's a very fragile question. Depending on the site, a lot of people don't know what to do when they're walking by these landscapes they have never walked in. So the letting be is, I think, it takes like 2.5 hours to let be. And by the time you've let be, I found a lot of these performers beginning to really understand or think about the fact that they never stopped at these sites ever before. When you live somewhere, you never think about where you live. You take it for granted. And this is what a cousin of mine said, living in Kerala. He said, Auntie, we live in this, you always praise where we live, but we live in the environmental, Kerala's full of trees and the ocean, but we never think about it. We take it for granted. So, there's that sense of the getting to know and the sense of letting be, I think is a very slippery, fluid space, and how it happens is individual. But when we do it in an ensemble, I feel like when you have more than 15 people in a performance, there's an incredibly transformative way in which the letting be and the need to know, I think, fuses. So thank you so much for all the comments. But, I have some very renowned directors here. Manga is here, Geeta is here. These are like, and so I was a little bit in stress about, giving a talk before them, Professor Nirmal Selvamani, but I think they understand where I'm coming from, which is a fulfillment from immersion, exactly the fulfillment that comes from immersion. So has there been an effort to reach out to more local performing groups in India, Malay coastlines to use the Indian performance to engage on this problem with a larger set of people? Well, I tend to, you see, when I go to these places, I go alone on a zero budget. I have no one supporting me. So I work with like street performers. All the people in my performance, the musicians, come from the subways, or they come from, like in the case of Lisbon, the performers were like gypsies and people I met in cafes who were making fruit drinks. And I asked them, what do you do? And do you want to perform tomorrow? And they're like, join me. That's how I get my performers all around the world. So the question is a lovely one. If you want to fund me, I can really locate some incredibly talented people and do some super first-rate performances. But my performances are very marginal and also very improvised and very passionate and very engaged, because these people are not professionals. They came to work with me because they're actually interested in the site. I learned very quickly in New York that the people who are trained in Juilliard and in the professional schools have no interest in my work, because they're not interested in my work, because I always tell them I cannot promise you an audience. Whereas the people who come, they come because of the site, and they stay because the place holds them in trance. And that's the best performer.
Dr. May Joseph, this is David Wesley. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, David. I hear
Hi,
you're
hi.
a great director, and I'm very pleased to meet you. I've heard you're very transformative with your students, which is really.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. My question, I wanted to write my question in the chat box. I realized I couldn't write it, so I'll ask my question. This is about the very process of writing about performance. I'm asking this question in the background of the idea of academic writing that we have,
Yes.
especially when it comes to writing through theories and things like that. But when it comes to performance, the writing style itself has to go through some transformation. Would you be able to talk about that?
Beautiful question. I love it. I'm actually, I've written a couple of essays. They are on academia.edu under my name. I've written many articles. There's a particular article called Slow Walk, which deals with the techniques I use in my, so your question is a beautiful question. How do you write about performance? And let me just say that that's where Geeta's idea of visual journalism is a fabulous tool. Basically use all techniques of writing, poetry, prose, flash fiction. I use flash fiction as an inspiration for performances. So there are some performances I do that are like 3-4 minutes, 5 minutes. So the performer does this piece in this incredible landscape, and that's the performance. There was no one to watch it, but it happened there, and that's what matters. So I think your question is a beautiful one. I use multi-genre approaches to writing. So I do a deep ethnography, I do archival work, I do critical theory, and I use what I want out of it. I do a lot of memoir writing. I write a lot of poetry. So I bring it all together. So you know what? I don't have a, I don't have a discipline. I work between disciplines. So, so your question is a beautiful one, because I think where you are in your discipline might shape how you write. If you want tenure in an English department, you have to write in a certain way. Luckily, I don't have those kind of disciplinary boundaries. I live in an interdisciplinary department, so I write through montage. I use Eisenstein's idea of the montage, bricolage, as Pratt says, these, different ways of combining styles. So beautiful question, David. I've written many things. You can read my book, Sea Log, which is a combination of poetry and prose. But about how to write about performance, I've written many essays, and they are on academia. You can see how I write. It's memoir, memory, history, archive, theory. All of it comes together. But beautiful question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joe.
Dr. May?
Yes.
Yeah. Can I speak? Am I audible?
Yes. Who is this?
I'm Dr. Ann Thomas from the Department of English, the faculty here.
Oh, yes.
So,
Hi.
Hi. I would like to know about any work that you have done at the Hawaiian coast, because I find, that has got a more, the Hawaiian landscape to that of Kerala and to Goa, that Konkan coast.
Oh,
So
the
is
Hawaiian
there
Coast.
Hawaiian coast, the landscape? So any kind of performance that you have done there, or because New York, it's really eye-opening for me. It was nice to have New York's changing landscape. So
So, a lovely question. I actually have traveled to the islands of Hawaii, and I am writing about the fact of how, the Hawaiians have forgotten their ocean, and not the native knowledges. There's a huge fight between indigenous populations to have the right to speak about their oceans, and the colonization, the settler colonial culture of America and Hawaii that has desecrated and completely decimated the ocean, and ignored the native ontologies of ways of being that embrace ocean and land ecologies. It's a beautiful question you have, and I met many native radical activists while I was there 6 months ago, and they are very much in tune with their ecologies, and they have no social or political power to shape the geology, which is highly militarized because of the American presence there. So, depending on which island, of Hawaii, I think the questions are very different. But in general, I was thinking of Honolulu specifically. Is totally a place where people have forgotten the sea. Everyone goes there extractive to go to the beach. That has nothing to do with knowing the ocean. And the indigenous people who live there have a large history of fighting settler colonialism to have access to the water. And the history of Hawaii is a persistent denial of water to native peoples through plumbings and sanitation and land grabs and extractive economies. So it's a beautiful question. And I only know the little bit of what I heard from the native indigenous scholars about Honolulu specifically. But your question is a powerful one, and they are fighting tooth and nail, the indigenous peoples, and they are not getting very far because the American military is so powerful. It's an ongoing, it's an open war there. And it's also very exciting to go there because people there are open about being, they're open about, we are colonized and get the hell out of our country. It's very exciting, it's inspiring to be there. But the fight is very frightening and sad, because the American military is like so there,
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's a great question.
Thank you, Professor May. So there's one last question on the YouTube chat box. We have a lot of people watching YouTube. That's the last one. What are your views on human colonization of Earth? You can just close with this.
I'm not quite sure what that means, but do you mean the question of anthropogenic and anthropocenic? The sort of the scale of human impact on the planet? I don't have big answers to that. But I think it's a huge part of how we across the planet are very concerned, right, with the impact of not just colonization, but of even for those of us who have not experienced colonization, forgetting the fact that we are a multi-species ecology, that we are in relationship with multiple other species and finding a way to care for these other species as much as we humans have extracted out of them. So I think that question is really a good one, and there's a lot of really intelligent work coming out of critical ocean studies, critical environmental studies that addresses that question very effectively. All I can say is, as an individual living in a very endangered climate change situation, I work in small gestures. The little I can do as a teacher, the little I can do in a lecture, the small thing I can do in a performance, this for me is a small way to contribute to the big questions. And so that would be my view as a response to this question of how do we deal with the anthropogenic impact and the future of climate, and how do we imagine planetary futures. What kind of future can we imagine for our children and grandchildren? So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Now we'll come to the close of today's webinar. I would like to read a comment by Monica Taruba. It says, Professor May, you're the spirit of water talking. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So that clearly shows what we feel about today's lecture. I request Dr. David Wesley of the Department of English MCC to kindly propose a word of thanks. Over to Dr. David.
Thank you, Professor Arun Kumar, for the opportunity to deliver the word of thanks on the first day of the international webinar on environmental theatre and language teaching. Theatre and ecology cannot be conceived in isolation, as we saw in the lecture given by Dr. May Joseph now. The collaborative nature of theatre and ecology, I could see it visible in the way this webinar was organized as well. A lot of teamwork and coordination has gone into it to put things together. And therefore, it is my duty to thank all those individuals who have been instrumental in making this happen today. On behalf of the Department of English, I would like to thank Dr. May Joseph for throwing light on the various aspects of theatre and ecology and how the interface between various disciplines happen to come so well together when we look in terms of performance. So the very conception of performance, how it tries to take us to various aspects of life, and the boundaries between disciplines disappear, boundaries between timelines disappear, boundaries between places, geographical places disappear. So it's all with the way performance takes place and the knowledge of the performance of a particular place and time, how it adds to the value of a particular moment in history, moment even in mind. All those things really makes things very encouraging for many of us who are struggling with these ideas. And today's talk by Dr. May Joseph has really enlightened us in many of these aspects. And I would really, really thank Dr. May Joseph for this lecture. Thank you, madam.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. David, and thank you, Arun Kumar, for an excellent moderation, and to Mekala for inviting me, and the honor of having all of you listen to me, but mostly the privilege of talking about these issues with, what do we say sometimes in the US, my people, which I don't know who they are, but today I kind of feel like I know who they are, so I say namaskar and thank you so much. It's been really great experience.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
At this moment, I also take this opportunity to thank our principal and secretary, Dr. Paul Wilson, for the unstinting encouragement to the activities of the department. He has been guiding us with great aplomb in these difficult times. Thank you, sir. I also thank the bursar of our college, Mr. Cyrus Kallupurakkal, for his support in the smooth conduct of this webinar. Thank you, sir. And a special thanks to our head of the department, Dr. Mekala Rajan, for the enthusiasm she brings to all of us in conducting various activities in the department. Thank you, ma'am. Special thanks to all the dignitaries and former professors of the department, special invitees and friends of the department for joining us today and making this webinar a memorable one. Thank you all. I would also like to thank all the staff members of the department for extending their support in the conduct of this webinar and being together, pitching in every time. Thank you all, dear professors. I would like to extend my special thanks to the technical support given by our students, Mr. Jerome, Mr. Theophilus, Mr. Allen, and Mr. Jackson. This webinar wouldn't be possible without these people. And I also thank all the participants from across the globe who joined us through YouTube Live as well. Thank you all. Finally, a huge thanks to Professor Arun Kumar for the meticulous planning and execution of this webinar. I once again thank everyone for joining us today. Looking forward to the next 2 days of this international webinar. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor David, for your kind words. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your participation in the day one of the international webinar. on environmental theatre and language teaching. Looking forward to the joy of meeting you again tomorrow. Please feel free to email us for any queries. See you tomorrow. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Arun.